June 2020's PlayStation Plus games are Call of Duty World War II and Star Wars Battlefront 2. Are either of these games good choices for you to download and play? Let's find out today on PLUSone, and let's start with Call of Duty. Released in 2017, World War II was the franchise's long-requested return to the Second Great War, after almost a decade of more advanced, modern, and infinite styles of warfare. And ghost fighting that one time. I don't know, I don't play these games, I'm just gonna pretend that Ghosts was a Bill Murray game. What I do know is that I remember the old days, all the way back to the ancient year of 2003, when Call of Duty games were exclusively about World War II. I loved these games back in the PS2 days, especially since I've always loved learning about history. Now, obviously these games weren't necessarily the most accurate, but to play out the battles that I'd read about and fill in those gaps with great stories to boot, it was awesome, and World War II at first glance brought these same moments into glorious 1080p. For a few minutes there, I really felt like a kid again. But not long after, that feeling washed away, because World War II, I'm sorry to say, is the most milquetoast first-person shooter I have played in recent memory. Nothing it does is offensively bad or anything, or even bad at all. The game, at its worst, is fine. That worst, though, oddly enough, is one of the series' most beloved staples, zombies. Now, zombies diehards will already know this, but World War II was developed by Sledgehammer Games, not Treyarch, so it doesn't follow the same rules or lore that the usual wave-based zombie modes have set up in the past. This very much threw me off at first, because my first instinct is to rebuild window barricades, and that's just not possible this time around. Really, though, you don't need those barricades, because this is far and away the least challenging zombies mode I've played in this series. Of the two zombies maps that come with the game, one is a very tiny house, and the other is a sprawling town with dozens of side streets and paths. Neither stands out in any way, really. The town's missions and objectives are the run-of-the-mill turn the power on, open the next gate to find the next thing to do fodder that I've come to expect from zombies, but the undead are more of an afterthought here than ever before. The player can take so many hits before getting downed, armor adds like a dozen more hits, points flowing like water, and it's incredibly cheap to pay for an auto-revive anyway. It took two of the game's special mini-boss zombies and me trying to corner myself to take me down on my first solo match completely blind. I will say I like that the objectives are a bit more clearly outlined in this game. That's a really welcome feature as somebody who's rarely interested in the usual die until you figure out where to go approach to this mode. It doesn't make the objectives a cakewalk or anything, but it makes it less painful to actually play the objective. But again, there's really so little challenge here with the zombies that you've almost gotta try to die, and that's just talking solo. With special character abilities that freeze all enemies in a small radius or give you a bottomless clip, and basic teamwork, you could easily survive long past the point that the mode is fun here. Zombies in World War II is very much a one and done in my book, and I took the liberty of checking what the Call of Duty community thinks of World War II's Horde mode, and yeah, it's not looked that highly upon, so I'm not alone. Of course, in addition to zombies, there's the standard campaign and multiplayer modes, and campaign is naturally where I started. This is where World War II evoked that nostalgic kickback to the classic Call of Duty games, and it's also where, a few minutes later, I snapped out of that nostalgia. After a little exposition scene to introduce us to our squad, we naturally go right to D-Day at Normandy, and the start of this level, atmospherically, is stellar. It's gritty, it's brutal, it's raw, it's war, and it doesn't romanticize that it's war. Of course, from there, it quickly becomes your basic Call of Duty affair, where our protagonist blows up everything with his bare hands, but the twist is that your squad actually kind of sort of helps you. As you take down enemies and occasionally perform heroic actions such as saving a comrade from being choked out, you'll build up one or more squad mate perks. These perks include your buddy tossing you some ammo or an extra set of medkits because, by the way, you have a health bar again, we're not invincible anymore. Since this campaign really aims to build a brotherhood between your crew, this was a pleasant little touch that I really appreciated having. Sadly, the rest of the campaign is fairly bland, at least as far as I've played. Given that World War II games have been very played out by now, there naturally aren't any new or bombastic set pieces, although the game does try with a hilariously bad, painfully long sequence where you drag your wounded partner through the trenches. Really, this is just a basic, forgettable run through the same scenarios we'd seen over a decade ago, albeit this time in full HD. Is that visual bump worth a downgrade in level design and originality? I would say no. As ugly as they can be, I'd rather just play the campaign from one of the older World War II games. And while we're talking about ugly, the lip syncing here might be worse than in those old games. It's really bad. And last up is the multiplayer, which is, you guessed it, Call of Duty multiplayer. Like with the other two modes, Sledgehammer did try to add some new bells and whistles here, setting up several combat divisions that provide their own special weapons when maxed out, but based on my playtime, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that it's not very special either. It's still your same old Twitch reaction Call of Duty game. You've got your score streaks and your deathmatch and your search and destroy and your domination and your bad spawns and yada yada yada. For what it's worth, World War II, at least to me, felt just a step slower than your usual COD experience, which, personally, I appreciate. Or at least I would if you could take another shot or two before dying. The super quick death speed in this series never really landed well with me, even in the games I was pretty good at, but that's just me. If you like Call of Duty, you'll at least like World War II a little bit. Like everything else with this game, nothing about the multiplayer stands out as particularly unique, especially good or bad. It's all just here. It's another Call of Duty because Lord knows we need one every single year or else. Given the sheer scale of World War II and the slightly airier nature of the maps that I played, I would have liked to see larger player counts, especially in the new objective-based War Mode. If you've ever played the Battlefield games, think of War Mode as a smaller scale Rush, except with more corner camping and less fun. Don't get me wrong, this mode is far and away the standout of World War II's multiplayer, but after a few games, I just wanted to buy the newest Battlefield game and be sad about how far Battlefield's fallen too. Actually, now that I'm thinking about ripping off Battlefield, that new Campaign Squad feature may as well just be a ripoff of Battlefield Bad Company 2. Man, when are we gonna get Bad Company 3? Never? Yeah, I know. What's that? Oh, yeah, Call of Duty. There's also a Headquarters mode too, I guess. I genuinely forgot about it until I checked my notes just now, even though it's the first thing shown to you when you start the multiplayer up. Oops. Altogether, World War II is the safest Call of Duty game I have ever seen, which honestly was a smart move considering Infinite Warfare was the previous COD offering. I just can't help but feel that we could have gotten so much more than just safety. Perhaps Sledgehammer isn't capable of more than safe, who knows, and maybe that's why their 2020 Call of Duty plans were shelved and Treyarch's next Black Ops game was moved up a full year. Either way, what's done is done. Fans have been clamoring to return to this era for the better part of a decade, but this game almost makes me feel like Activision was right to keep us waiting. I'm sure there are a few tricks we've yet to see from the World War II shooter genre, but the well's certainly gotta be close to running dry by this point, no? Moving from one shooter to the next, let's dive into Battlefront 2. Does this game lovingly capture the spirit of Star Wars? Well, just like Episode 9, Battlefront 2 opens up with an end-user license agreement and plops us into a static multiplayer window. Bold choice, J.J. Abrams is so brave. A lot has changed since this game's historically panned launch. In case you don't recall, EA tried doing what EA does best and focused this game's multiplayer around premium microtransactions, loot boxes, the usual garbage cranked up to a ridiculous degree. Thanks to the backlash, DICE was forced to rework the monetization schemes, for the most part removing them entirely and leaving them solely to cosmetics like character skins, and EA's been on a several-year apology tour with the Star Wars IP ever since. In fact, Battlefront 2's last major update only came out about a month ago at the end of April, 2.5 years after its launch. Now, all of that is well and good, but it doesn't matter if the gameplay isn't fun. Is it? So let me start by saying, like everybody else with a soul, I love the old Battlefront games, and for as sanitized as EA's first Battlefront reboot felt, as if it were made with an actual cookie cutter, I enjoyed it enough to justify the $5 I spent on it. In almost every way, I really loved playing EA's Battlefront 2. It lovingly captures the spirit of the older games while modernizing them with improved mechanics. Thanks to all of those updates, you can now play in all three eras of Star Wars, and while the main four classes will be about the same regardless of which era you're playing in, by defeating enemies, playing the objective, and even dying for some reason, you earn points that you can spend to play as specialty characters in your next life. Given some of these are also similar, such as the Jet Troopers, but others are entirely unique, like Droidekas, Bounty Hunters, and of course, yes, even the Jedi and Sith. Every class has 3 perks as well, and each class has its own set of cards that you unlock through playing each one individually. These cards can grant you more points when you take damage, more effective grenades, the usual passive perks. Depending on the modes you play, you may be locked to specific eras for specific maps. You won't be playing on the Death Star with the Droid Separatist, for example, but some game modes will allow a wider array of hero/villain characters than others. For example, I've played as Darth Maul while fighting against rebels, which technically I know might be canon, but I don't care. You'll start by fighting over 5 conquest points, then when one team reaches 100 points, they'll begin staging an assault on the enemy ship, which involves another set of conquest points. From there, the assaulting team will try and destroy the 3 ships' cores to win the game. However, if the defending team successfully holds the line at any point on the ship, the game just goes back to that original ground war. On paper, this could lead to this thrilling back and forth until one side turns the tides and ekes out a win, but in practice, my first match of Battlefront 2 lasted 40 minutes, and I'm fairly certain I joined 40 minutes in by looking at the player scores. Nothing says modern big team shooter like feeling like you've had no impact on the battle. Not every Supremacy map plays out exactly the same way, but it feels like a bit of an oversight for each map to just have the same static set of objectives. Why not move the capture points, or move the battle to another level on the planet? Battlefront 1 had several maps per planet, so it's not like this is a novel concept for DICE. What magnifies this somewhat slow, plodding game mode is the fact that despite taking place in a universe where one blaster shot is usually fatal, everybody survives for way too long in combat. Naturally, some classes have more health than others, especially the ones that you're spending points to use, but even the basic classes can take a while to take out. It doesn't help that this game tries to be both a third and first-person shooter, so aiming has to be tweaked at 2 levels, and neither one feels particularly excellent to me. It all certainly works, I suppose, and it all feels kind of like the old-school Battlefront games, but ironically, this might have been the time when DICE should have given us less of what we were asking for. Once you start to get comfortable, the game does get incredibly fun, at least if you're a fan of Star Wars and the older games like I am. For all of its faults, Battlefront 2 does feel like it was made with a ton of love. You can see that with the actually dozens of maps, and with the different voice lines and outfits given to all the characters from all over the series' history. There's even a mode called Ewok Hunt, which is as ridiculous as it sounds, and that's what this franchise is all about. On top of the matchmaking, we've also got a co-op mode here, and a group of single-player options, including playing against bots and a full campaign. The campaign was surprisingly fun from what I've played, putting you in the shoes of a Special Empire squad right at the very end of the war with the Rebellion. Since this game pretty much starts out with the destruction of the second Death Star, this group breaks off and joins the New Republic during its rebuilding era. It sort of tries to bridge the gap between episodes 6 and 7, especially via the free DLC epilogue campaign called Resurrection. It's a fun, sometimes generic handful of hours that at least tries to do something new rather than just reciting all of the old battles and completely reusing multiplayer maps. Is Battlefront 2 particularly fun as a shooter? You know, I don't know. I had fun playing all the modes I tried, but I also have significant gripes with the bloated battle times and combat pacing. When the game works, it's magic, or force I guess, they're the same thing, let's be honest. But every now and then you'll take a breath and think, man, this is going on for too long, and you'd be right. Even still, I have a feeling that I'm going to be coming back to Battlefront 2 every now and again when I want a quick Star Wars fix, because it hit just enough of the right buttons that I can overlook the weird card system and the matches that sometimes feel like you're not doing anything even though you're near the top of your team in score, and the loot boxes that give you actually nothing, because that actually happened to me. Given its size, clocking in like World War II at about 120 gigs, I don't know that I can recommend that everybody +1 it to their collection, but if you like Star Wars, and especially if you like Battlefront, it'll give you at least a few hours of fun. Are you trying out one or both of June's free games? Let me know in the comments, and while you're here, you should check out some of my other videos, like this one where I talk about the controversy that led to The Elder Scrolls Oblivion changing its rating from teen to mature. As always, until next time, stay golden.